When we last left Sylvester Stallone, Rocky V had come out and tanked, putting the future of his flagship franchise in jeopardy.
I didn't hear no bell.
Similarly, Rambo 3, while a hit internationally, was a notable disappointment at the domestic box office. At the end of 1990, Stallone's career was definitely at a crossroads, and it's here that perhaps he made one of his most ill-advised decisions, to dive headfirst into comedy. Hey, it worked for Arnold Schwarzenegger, right?
Papa, what have I done?
Nobody hurts my baby.
Stallone's back-to-back comedies, 1991's Oscar and the following year's Stop and My Mom Will Shoot, are widely maligned among critics and fans. Sly himself doesn't seem to have much love for them. So how is it that perhaps the world's biggest action star decides to try his luck at comedy?
This is the point of no return.
The important thing to remember is that at the time, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was always Stallone's biggest rival in terms of box office muscle, was having major success in the genre, having teamed up with Ivan Reitman and Danny DeVito to make Twins, which not only became his biggest hit to date, but it also opened him up to a whole new audience.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.
As a child, I remember vividly Twins being the first time I ever got a load of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you know what? It made a super fan of me, and by the time Total Recall and Terminator 2 hit theaters, a lot of the kids that went to see Twins when they were younger were lining up to see him in his hardcore action movies, so it definitely grew his audience. He also reteamed with Ivan Reitman on Kindergarten Cop, which was another pretty big hit, although it did have the misfortune of opening pretty close to Home Alone, so it wasn't quite on the level of Twins.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
But one could still imagine that Stallone was keen to prove that he could beat the Austrian oak, his greatest rival, at his own game. Here's the thing though, Stallone had actually tried comedy before, and it almost ended his career. Flashback to the year 1984, and two of the biggest hits of the year were Beverly Hills Cop and Romancing the Stone. Sylvester Stallone had actually been offered the leads in both movies, but turned them down. The movie he did do that year was Rhinestone, a comedy that pitted him with Dolly Parton and the director of Porky's, Bob Clark.
I'm laying in the mud, looking at a duck.
To be fair to Stallone, Bob Clark had also just directed A Christmas Story, so, he probably didn't necessarily think he was getting involved with the Schlockmaster. It's worth noting that Bob Clark definitely had one of the weirdest careers on record. I mean, he made one of the greatest slasher movies of all time, Black Christmas, and probably the greatest Christmas movie of all time, A Christmas Story, but the same guy also made, the horn dog teen exploitation classic, Porky's, probably the worst ever Dan Aykroyd movie, Loose Cannons, and ended his career doing Baby Geniuses. Very, very strange filmography. But anyway, getting back to Rhinestone, again, he would team up with Dolly Parton, who plays a country star that's trapped in an abusive contract with a controlling manager who's played by Ron Liebman. She makes him a bet.
Shoot, if I had half a chance, I could turn anybody into a rhinestone cowboy, and I could do it a lot better than you, that's for sure.
Really?
Really.
If she can turn anyone he picks into a country star, she has to be let out of her contract. If she fails in a very 1980s but kind of creepy twist, she'll have to sleep with the horn dog manager. Of course, the guy she has to turn into a country star is Sylvester Stallone, who plays a cab driver she takes up to the mountains to teach a couple of countrified classics. All it takes is for Stallone to start singing the infamous Drinkenstein number for everyone to see why this movie was a huge flop.
Budweiser, you created a monster, and they call me Wiggenstein.
That said, it's not really all that bad. Sly and Dolly have kind of decent chemistry, they seem to like each other, and when Sly goes country rock at the end to sing Stay Out of My Bedroom, I gotta say, when I was a kid, I thought it was kind of badass, and I was tapping my toe along to the song, especially once Dolly jumps in and they start, duetting. It's pretty awesome, actually. But, I have to say, as a hardcore Stallone fan, I would probably follow him everywhere, which is why I probably gave Rocky V a 6 out of 10. My editor on this show, Bill Mazzola, wanted to murder me for that. But I digress. Rhinestone was pretty bad. Now, given that Sly won a Razzie for it and the fact that critics and audiences despised it, you'd think it would have scared him off of comedy for good, but it sure didn't. To give Sly credit, the first comedy he did post Rocky V was a pretty underrated flick. Oscar comes from John Landis, whose career was in the dumps following the fallout from the infamous Twilight Zone accident where, one of his stars was beheaded by a helicopter, as well as 2 kids. So, yeah, his reputation in Hollywood wasn't terrific at the time. In it, Sly plays a 1930s gangster named Snaps Provolone, like the cheese.
Can I talk to you alone, Mr. Provolone?
He's trying to leave the rackets behind after a deathbed promise to his father, played by the great Kirk Douglas, who also made a very little-known film with Arnold Schwarzenegger called The Villain. The whole thing is done kind of like a Damon Runyon-style comedy, with Provolone and his lighthearted gangster cronies trying to figure out who impregnated his teenage daughter, played by young Marissa Tomei, who embezzled money from him, and they want to keep him out of jail long enough for him to buy his way into big business so he can go legit.
Jeez, I'm used to dealing with mobsters, bootleggers, and gunzels, but you bankers? Scary.
It's actually kind of funny in an old-fashioned way. One of the great gangster stars of the 30s and 40s, Edward G. Robinson, made a whole slew of movies like this, and I'm pretty sure that that's what Landis was going for here. Who offers an early role for Chaz Palminteri, who would break out pretty big 2 years later by writing and co-starring in A Bronx Tale. Meanwhile, there's also Peter Riegert, yes, the great Peter Riegert from Animal House as Sly's number 2, who mercilessly steals scenes from him from start to finish.
Teresa's pregnant?
Teresa's pregnant? Who's Teresa?
My daughter, you sap.
It also has a nice role from Marissa Tomei that probably won her the star-making part she would get a year later in My Cousin Vinny, while Tim Curry, the great Don Amici, and more put in welcome appearances. Some critics sneered at the movie just because it happened to star Stallone, and it didn't help that Landis, of course, at the time, was one of the most despised men in Hollywood. But some critics have actually come out in support of it retrospectively. Still, it was a big financial flop, grossing $23 million, which was even less than Rocky V, and it certainly didn't help his career.
Sorry, Papa, I did the best I could.
Still, I have a soft spot for it. Like Over the Top, it was probably one of the Stallone movies, oddly enough, that I watched the most as a kid, so I'd give it probably a 7 out of 10.
I don't even know what I'm talking about.
Still, Sly's biggest disaster as a movie star, perhaps throughout his entire career, was still to come with him making the ill-advised decision to make Stop or My Mom Will Shoot next. The urban legend behind this was that Arnold Schwarzenegger faked interest in what he knew was a terrible script to get Stallone to star in it. Oh, the mischievous Austrian.
Born to be bad.
Yes, we are.
This story always sounded very unlikely until Schwarzenegger himself confirmed it in a magazine interview, so yep, it's actually all true. What a wacky guy. To give Sly the benefit of the doubt, it probably seemed like a pretty safe bet. I mean, the movie came from the writers of Twins, and it was produced by Ivan Reitman. Something somewhere went terribly, terribly wrong. Perhaps it was the choice of Roger Spottiswoode to direct. A solid action director who did movies like Air America and the James Bond movie Tomorrow Never Dies, he never really had the light touch you needed for comedy. His previous comedy, Turner and Hooch, ended with Tom Hanks shooting Coach Craig T. Nelson in the face with a shotgun while his beloved canine partner died an agonizingly slow death. It ruined many a kid's birthday parties, including my own. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot stars Sylvester Stallone as a cop with commitment issues. He's dating his sexy captain, played by Jo Beth Williams, but he's insecure about her being his boss.
Oh, the feeling stuff.
Right. The feeling stuff.
Partly because he has some mommy issues. His overprotective mom, Estelle Getty's Tootie, comes to visit and becomes embroiled in an arms smuggling ring, and it ends with him and his mom getting into a gunfight with the villains. She backs him up, and he delivers that iconic phrase that gives the movie its title.
Enough! Or my mom will shoot!
So at the time, Estelle Getty was a pretty big star, playing the smart-mouthed Sophia on the great show Golden Girls. Originally, the mother character was supposed to be monstrous because, Estelle Getty as Sophia was always kind of a bitch, right? I mean, that's why everybody loved her so much on the show. But apparently, Getty was so sweet behind the scenes that they couldn't bear and make her unlikable, so they changed her into a sweetheart, probably ruining the film to some extent. The resulting movie was so tame that they had to cut in a long shot of Sly's ass just to earn the movie a PG-13 rating, lest it be considered for a terminally uncool PG rating. This was actually the first Stallone movie I ever saw in theaters. Yes, that's right. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot was the first time I ever saw Sylvester Stallone in 35mm on the big screen. Yeah, not the best introduction, but I'd seen all the Rambo movies at that point, so I knew he wasn't just some wacky comedy guy. The movie was a complete fiasco despite me buying a ticket to it, only grossing $28 million, but worldwide, funny enough, it actually turned a profit. Stallone, for obvious reasons, is not a fan of this film, not a surprise. And once again, Stallone, quote-unquote, won a Razzie. It was bad enough that this would put an end to his aspirations of making a hit comedy forevermore. Happily for Stallone, the next year would see the release of not one but two of his greatest movies ever, and by the end of the year, he would once again be a $20 million movie superstar and would briefly be again the king of action in Hollywood. But that's a story for another time. Meanwhile, I give Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, probably the lowest rating I've ever given a movie on Sly Revisited, an abysmal 0 out of 10. Talk to you again soon on the next episode of Sly Revisited.
You shot him. No shit.